The state of Florida might just be back in college football, and that should be a scary thought for the rest of the country because between 1993 and 2013, the state of Florida accounted for 7 national championships between Miami, Florida State, and the University of Florida. Since then, since 2014, the college football playoff era, there's only been one appearance by a Florida team in the college football playoff. That was actually Florida State in 2014, the first year of the college football playoff, and they got knocked out in the first round 59-20 by Oregon. Of course, there's been a couple unlucky seasons for Florida. UCF in 2018 should have been in when they went undefeated and won their conference championship. Florida State in 2023 went undefeated and won their conference championship, and obviously was famously jumped over by Alabama in one of the stupidest decisions by the college football playoff committee, and that's saying something because they made some stupid decisions. And then Miami last season had a shout to get into their 10-2 season, but of course they were also left on the outside looking in. But something about 2025 feels different for Florida, and I know we're only 1 week in, but it feels like there's got to be at least one college football playoff team from Florida. And I think they had the 3 most impressive teams in week 1 coming from their state. So let me give you 2 stats from each of those teams to show you why they're for real in 2025. So first, let's start with the team that I think was most impressive in week 1, and that's Miami. And the first stat we've got here is 94 rushing yards allowed to Notre Dame in their 27-24 victory on Sunday evening. And that's super impressive for a couple reasons. One, we know that coming into 2025, Notre Dame had one of the top rushing attacks with all the returning production from Jeremiah Love, the rest of the running back room, and of course their always impressive offensive line. And last season they averaged 200 yards per game, and they only were able to muster 94 yards per game against Miami on Sunday. And it's not just the total yards per game. In 2024, they averaged 5.7 yards per carry. That was down to 3.5 yards per carry against Miami. Now, Miami did have a good rushing defense by stats last season. They only allowed about 113 yards per game. But a lot of that has to be attributed to the shootouts that they were in, with the other teams having to throw the ball to keep up with their high-powered offense. Now, I don't think that their high-powered offense has gone anywhere in 2025. Maybe it's not quite the top level, but I think that this game proves that it doesn't have to be, because 27 points, which is what they scored on Sunday, would have been their second lowest output in all of 2024. The only one that would have been lower was 23 points that they had against Georgia Tech in their first loss of the season. So it really proves that Miami has found a way to play games and not have to outscore every single team, but they can actually rely on their defense at least a little bit to keep them in the game. That's very important for a team that's looking to get into the college football playoff and compete for a national championship in 2025, which, if they're able to play defense like this and still have the explosive plays that we saw on Sunday, there's a really good chance that we could see them deep into January in 2026. The second stat for Miami is 0, and that's 0 interceptions thrown by Carson Beck. Last season, there were 4 different games in which he threw multiple interceptions, and that's a big reason why he ended up at Miami instead of going to the NFL draft and probably being a first-round pick in 2025. And there were a lot of questions about how much money Miami spent to bring him in, over $4 million in NIL, and whether he was going to be able to perform for Miami. But people forget, before last season, he was a projected number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. So he has the talent, and he's shown it at the top levels of college football. I think that Georgia was kind of a weird team last year that couldn't really run the ball. They didn't have the same defense that they had kind of in some of the years that Kirby Smart has led them to national championships. And they put a lot more on Carson Beck. And maybe they didn't have the best setup to throw the ball like that, because Georgia never does. But we saw what Miami was able to do with Cam Ward. Of course, Cam Ward is a very special talent, but he worked his way up, got to Miami, and balled out last season. I think that Carson Beck is looking to replicate that a little bit. Of course, it's a little bit of a different path, but they've proven to have a quarterback-friendly offense. And Carson Beck has the talent to excel in that kind of an offense. And if they can combine that with the defense playing the way that it did against Notre Dame, there's a real shot for this team to not just win the ACC championship, which I think is definitely a possibility, but maybe win some games in the college football playoff. Now, of course, this is just the first game, and there were some questionable throws by Carson Beck. Maybe he's lucky to not have any interceptions. But if he can keep those down, and if he has an interception, maybe not throwing 2 or 3 and breaking down the game completely, there's something there. We'll have to see as we go further on. But I think that Miami probably is going to jump a few spots in the AP poll here and be pretty tough to reckon with going on in the season. Next, we'll go to Florida State, and I think that this was the most surprising game of the weekend. I would say that Miami, because they had to play Notre Dame and it was such a high-pressure game, solo game on the schedule, nobody else was playing at that time. That's a more impressive victory to me. But Florida State, that's something crazy. And we're going to start with the first and most obvious stat, and that's one. One victory against the FBS in 2024 for Florida State. They've tied that total in week 1 against a top 10 Alabama team at home with a 31-17 victory. And it was super impressive. I think when I talked about Florida State this summer, I was talking about them having a curse on their program, going from 13-0 to 2-10, and what I would say is probably the worst season in college football history relative to expectations, relative to what they did the season before. If they can turn that around this season, maybe get 8-9 wins, Mike Norvell not only saves his job, but maybe he saves his program. That was a little bit down in the dumps before he got there. He revived it, and then it seemed like maybe he lost it, but bringing in Gus Malzahn, bringing in Tommy Castellanos, bringing in a new defensive coordinator, 50 players added to the team, 49 to be exact, added to the team this season, completely turning over that roster and recognizing that they can never go back to 2024. They can never have that kind of season again, because in modern college football, especially where Florida State is in a somewhat precarious position in the ACC, trying to find their way out before the next college football playoff media rights deal comes around, trying to find their way in the SEC or the Big Ten to get that big media money and to stay on with whatever is going to happen in the next realignment cycle. This is a very important season. They need to get that back going. And of course, there's no better way to start with a huge upset victory at home. Get your fans going. They had $250+ million in renovations to their stadium this season, and they opened that thing up with a bang in 2025. And speaking of adding Castellanos and Malzahn, the biggest thing that you could say is there were 10 explosive plays. That's classified by a 10-yard plus run or a 20-yard plus pass in their game against Alabama. That's exactly what they need. That's the kind of juice that they need to bring back. I would say that is the biggest thing that they were missing in 2024. There was not a lack of talent. Maybe there was a little bit of a lack of organization. Maybe there's a little bit of lack of motivation. That all kind of comes around with, you could put that into juice as the thing that they were really missing. And 10 explosive plays, quarterback that's talking his shit before the game, talking his shit after the game, and performing during the game. That's what this team needs. A little bit of swagger, and that's what, any Florida team needs. That's the Miamis of old, the Jameis Florida State teams, the Urban Meyer Florida teams. They had a swagger that no one else can match because they're Florida guys playing in Florida and performing at the highest levels in college football. I don't know that Florida State is a college football playoff team. I don't know if they're an ACC title contender, but they seem to definitely be a team that's going to have to be dealt with every single time you play them. It's not going to be a walkover like it was in 2024, and it's probably not even going to be a victory in most scenarios. I really think that if they have less than 9 wins this season, it would be a shock, because what they showed in week 1 was that they have the speed, the size, the athleticism, and the juice to have a really great season in 2025. The last team is USF, and this was the first game that I watched of college football this season. I didn't watch anything from week 0. I tuned in to watch Boise State on Thursday, and USF kicked their ass. It was not even close. The first stat that I have is 18. There were 18 plays that Boise State ran that were 2 yards or less. That's on a completed pass, a run, or a sack. 18 different plays. Boise State, of course, loses Ashton Denty. They have an all-new starting offensive line, but USF was able to manhandle them, and that's not really what happens with Boise State. Even against some of the best teams in the country, when they play, they don't get manhandled. USF had a couple new transfers come in. They have a very experienced defense, and specifically defensive line, and they were able to use their size and athleticism to stop Boise State from getting anything going. Of course, there was quite a few turnovers that they forced as well, but I think it's more impressive that they were able to stop plays that were successful, right? They completed the pass, they got the run, whatever. 18 different times, it was 2 yards or less, and they had, I think, 5 tackles for loss, including the sack that they had in that game. That is the kind of thing that if you can do that as a G5 team, that's what you can transfer through all those games, and that's what can be transferred to the college football playoff and give you a fighting chance. If you have the size and athleticism of a team like USF, that can give you a fighting chance against those Power 5 teams, which they're going to have to take care of. We'll talk about here in the end, but they've got a couple more games against Power 4 teams that they're going to have to show up in. The second set is 8, and that's 8 games that Byrum Brown missed in 2024. USF was not talked about last season. They did not have a great season. They got to the bowl game, but they did not have a great season. And a lot of that is because Byrum Brown missed basically the entire season. If you watch that game on Thursday, he was the dude that stood out. I mean, even from some of the plays that they had on defense, the real standout was Byrum Brown knocking people over, running people over, and being the most athletic player on the field every single play. That kind of player, similar to Tommy Castellanos in Florida State, those kind of players are the difference makers in college football. Quarterbacks that can run, that have vision, that can throw deep balls. If you have that, and you have a solid defense and a couple solid weapons, especially from a G5 team, that's a team that could run the table in their conference, win their conference championship, and find their way into the college football playoff. That's all that you can ask for now as a G5 team. If you can take care of business in the games that you're supposed to win and win your conference championship, you can find your way into the college football playoff. And if you have a player like Byrum Brown, if you have a defensive line like USF has, if you have an offensive line like USF has, you can find your way into one upset. That's all you need. If you can win one college football playoff game as a G5, you will go down in the record books. Cincinnati couldn't do it. Boise State couldn't do it. The first team that can do that, and it might just be USF, is going to go down in the record books as one of the greatest teams of all time. They're going to go down with the 2007 Boise State upset over Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl. That's the kind of rarefied air that you can find yourself in this new 12-team college football playoff if you can just find a way to get one upset in the college football playoff. So Florida has a lot of things going for it in 2025. We didn't even talk about the Gators, who blew out Long Island and are probably going to be a top 14, 12 team in the country when the new AP poll comes out today. But one of the things that they have against them is that all of these teams have to end up playing each other, and a lot of them are playing each other early on in the season. USF is going to go with Florida and Miami back-to-back in the next 2 weeks. Then Miami has got South Florida, and Florida State, all 3 in a row. And then, of course, Florida and Florida State play each other at the end of the season, and that one's going to be at Florida. So it's tough to see how they're going to get 2 college football playoff teams, even if they end up getting 1, because they all have to play each other. And I think that's exciting for Florida college football because all these teams seem to be pretty good this season. And I think those are going to be some very exciting games. But I think it's going to hurt the state as far as how many participants they can get this season because they all have to play each other. If I had to take a guess at who's going to make it, right now I would say Miami. I think that game was super impressive. And if they can replicate that kind of performance, they are the best team in the state right now. But of course, we didn't really see what Florida could do. They blew out Long Island, but I mean, what does that really mean? They did what they were supposed to do. We're going to see a lot more next week when they have to end up playing USF, who I think is right now the leader in the clubhouse for the G5. And then, of course, Florida State, it's a very impressive victory against Alabama, but are they going to be able to follow that up? Are they going to be able to keep that juice and keep that mojo going? We're going to see. These teams, we're going to see who's the best in the state. That's the one thing that we know. We're going to see who's the best in the state. I really hope that we get at least 1 or 2 teams. I have no stake in this. I don't care for any of these teams, but I really think that Florida as a state being back in college football is very important for the 12-team playoff, very important for the state of college football, and I think that this is the year that it happens. If it's going to happen, this is the year that it happens, and I'm hoping for at least 1, but maybe 2 or even 3 participants coming out of Florida for this year's college football playoff. Thanks for watching that video. Make sure that you like and subscribe. And if you made it this far, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Who do you think is the best team in Florida in 2025? Do you think that there's a path for them to get more than 1 college football playoff team out of the state? And do you think that USF has a real chance at getting an upset in the next 2 weeks to really bolster their resume for the college football playoff? If you want to watch more of my videos, I do have those for you. Right here, I've got my most recent video, which is a look at college football in 2030, how the conference realignment might play out. So if you're interested in that, check that out. I have my first version of that up here, which is one of my most popular videos, so you can see the differences between the two. Other than that, I've got my subscribe link on this side, and we will check you next time. See ya!